was a quiet July morning in Salt Lake City, Utah. The sun had barely risen and the streets were still half asleep. But inside one small apartment, the morning had already begun. A woman, young and full of life, tied her shoelaces, grabbed her water bottle, and stepped out for her usual morning jog. That woman was Laurie Hacking. Laurie was everything people admired: cheerful, organized, and loving. She worked at Wells Fargo Bank and had been preparing to move with her husband, Mark Hacking, to North Carolina. They were planning a new life together. Mark had told everyone he had been accepted into medical school at the University of North Carolina. Laurie, who was 5 weeks pregnant, had already begun dreaming of that future. A new city, a new job, a new baby, a new chapter. But that morning, when Laurie went out jogging and didn't return, nothing would ever be the same again. Mark called the police later that day, claiming that his wife had left for a run at 6 a.m. from Memory Grove Park and hadn't come back. He sounded shaken, confused, maybe even heartbroken. He told the authorities he had searched for her car, walked the trail, and found nothing. The news spread quickly. Friends, family, and even strangers began combing the city for any trace of Laurie. Flyers with her smiling face were stapled to telephone poles, and local media began to cover the story. But behind the cameras, something felt off. Detectives noticed strange inconsistencies from the beginning. Why would a man whose wife was missing go shopping for a new mattress the same morning she disappeared? Security camera footage from a nearby store showed Mark buying a mattress just hours after Laurie vanished. And why was the old mattress missing when police visited the couple's apartment? The first real breakthrough came when police found bloodstains on the mattress frame and in the car. Forensic testing confirmed it was Laurie's blood. It was no longer a missing persons case, it was turning into a homicide investigation. Soon, more secrets began to unravel. Laurie's family revealed she had called her father and her best friend just days earlier. She had found out Mark had been lying. There was no acceptance letter, no medical school. Mark had never even applied. He had faked the whole story. For over a year, he had pretended to go to class, fabricated paperwork, and lived a double life. Laurie was devastated. Her entire future, her marriage, her unborn child's life, was built on a lie. And now, she was gone. The police grew more suspicious of Mark, but he wasn't talking. Days passed, search teams kept looking, scouring parks, landfills, highways, any place she might have been. Then, something strange happened. Mark was found wandering around a hotel lobby naked, talking nonsense. He was taken to a psychiatric hospital. Some believed it was a mental breakdown. Others believed it was a performance, a calculated attempt to appear mentally unfit and avoid prison. But the truth wouldn't stay buried for long. As the days passed, the search for Laurie intensified. Volunteers combed the city, helicopters hovered above wooded areas, canine units were brought in, but no one could find a single trace of her. Mark appeared in the news frequently, standing in front of cameras, teary-eyed, pleading for help. "Please," he said, "please help bring Laurie home." His voice trembled, his hands shook, but those close to him started noticing something odd in his behavior. His grief didn't feel real. At the apartment, investigators kept digging, literally and figuratively. In a garbage bin outside the building, they found a trash bag. Inside it was a pillow with bloodstains. It matched the mattress blood. And again, it matched Laurie's DNA. This wasn't a disappearance anymore. This was murder. And then, the lies unraveled like thread from a torn fabric. Mark's claim of attending medical school was a complete fabrication. Not only had he never applied, but he had forged emails and letters to convince Laurie and their families that he'd been accepted. For nearly 2 years, he lived a lie, leaving the apartment each morning dressed like a student, carrying a backpack, but he wasn't going to class. He sat in libraries, wandered parks, sometimes just drove around. Laurie had discovered the truth only days before she vanished. And according to her closest friends, she had confronted Mark. She was furious. She had said she couldn't live in a marriage built on deception. She was considering leaving. And she had told her friend, "This changes everything." The night before Laurie disappeared, she and Mark had an argument. It was heated. She told him she had spoken to the university. She knew. She wasn't afraid to call out the truth anymore. No one saw Laurie alive after that night. The police were closing in, but before they could arrest him, Mark checked himself into a psychiatric hospital. Doctors said he was delusional, muttering incoherently. But his family wasn't convinced. Neither were the police. They believed Mark was stalling, trying to appear mentally unstable to delay or avoid criminal charges. Then, one night, Mark's brothers came forward. They looked hollow, pale. Their voices were heavy with disbelief. They told detectives that Mark had confessed to them in the hospital. He said he had killed Laurie. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply told them he had shot her in the head while she was sleeping. It was a .22 caliber rifle, a weapon they kept in the apartment. After killing her, he wrapped her body in garbage bags, then placed it into a dumpster behind the apartment complex. The garbage truck came the next morning. Her body, he said, had likely been taken to the city landfill. The police were stunned, but they believed every word. The pieces finally fit. His lies, the blood, the missing mattress, the trash bag, the timing. The murder wasn't spontaneous. It was a decision. A cold, calculated moment where Mark chose to silence Laurie rather than face the truth. He couldn't bear the shame. He couldn't lose control. And so he ended her life, and with it, the life of their unborn child. Now there was just one mission left: find Laurie's body. It was a monstrous task. The Salt Lake City landfill was massive. Hundreds of tons of garbage poured in every day, but the police committed to it. Teams of officers, cadaver dogs, forensic experts, all began the grueling process of sifting through rotting waste, endless piles of trash, in hope of finding even a fragment of Laurie. Day after day, week after week. And then, after more than a month of digging, they found her. August 2004, the Utah summer was merciless, and so was the work. Dozens of officers and volunteers stood ankle-deep in filth, the smell unbearable, their faces hidden behind masks and goggles. Each day they worked the Salt Lake City landfill like it was sacred ground, because somewhere buried beneath tons of trash lay the body of a young woman whose life had been stolen. They had a rough idea of where to search, based on garbage truck routes and timestamps, but there were no guarantees. Everyone knew it was like looking for a single page in a burning library. Still, they kept going. Then, on August 2nd, nearly 5 weeks after Laurie vanished, a decomposing body was uncovered. Wrapped in black plastic bags, small bones, brittle and twisted, dark matted hair, and beneath it all, a bullet lodged in the skull. Dental records confirmed it was Laurie. Salt Lake City fell silent. People wept on the streets. Friends left flowers, notes, and candles outside the Hacking residence. It wasn't just about Laurie anymore. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. A man who had seemed devoted had, in fact, been capable of the unthinkable. Mark was still in the psychiatric hospital, but he could no longer hide. The moment Laurie's body was found, prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder. When detectives went to inform him, Mark didn't react. He simply looked down and nodded. There were no tears, no denial, no anger. It was as if he had already buried that part of himself. In court, his defense tried to reduce the charge to second-degree murder, suggesting diminished capacity. But the evidence, the planning, the motive, the lies, all pointed to deliberate intent. Laurie had been asleep when he pulled the trigger. She never saw it coming. She never had a chance. Her parents sat quietly in the courtroom, hands clenched, eyes wet. They had lost their only daughter, and the grandchild they never got to hold. Mark, wearing a prison jumpsuit and chains, stood before the judge. The courtroom was so silent you could hear people breathing. And then he spoke. He admitted everything. "I killed my wife," he said softly. "I killed her because I couldn't face the consequences of my lies. I couldn't stay, and I took away the one person who loved me the most." No excuses, no insanity plea, just the truth, raw, bitter, shameful. The judge sentenced him to 6 years to life in prison. The state of Utah didn't have mandatory sentencing guidelines at the time, so parole was technically possible, but the public backlash was intense. People were outraged that a man who murdered his pregnant wife in cold blood might one day walk free. Laurie's parents turned their grief into action. They fought for a new law, a bill that would make sure violent criminals like Mark couldn't get out so easily. They called it Laurie's Law. It passed in 2006. Now, in Utah, judges could hand down tougher minimum sentences for first-degree murder, ensuring that life really meant life. The Hacking apartment was emptied. The mattress was gone. The walls were painted over, but the shadow remained. Every time someone mentioned Mark, people remembered how someone could wear a smile so perfectly and still hold a loaded gun in their hand. Laurie never got to name her baby, never got to move to North Carolina, never got to grow old with the man she once trusted. Her story became a warning, a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers in the dark, but from the people we share our beds with. Mark Hacking entered the Utah State Prison in early 2005. He was just 28 years old, once a beloved husband, now a convicted killer. The same man who had smiled in wedding photos and promised a lifetime of love was now behind concrete walls, serving a sentence for the murder of his pregnant wife. He kept to himself in prison. Inmates knew who he was. Some wanted nothing to do with him. Others resented him more than most, because even among criminals, there are lines you don't cross. And Mark had crossed them all. He received letters in prison, not of support but questions, from strangers, from women who had once trusted their own husbands, from victims of domestic violence. Why, they wrote, why didn't you just walk away? Mark rarely responded. When he did, his replies were short, controlled, hollow. Laurie's family, meanwhile, tried to find meaning in the aftermath. Her parents, Thelma and Doug Soares, were never the same. They had lost their only daughter, their future grandchild, in any sense of safety. But through the pain, they pushed forward. They spoke at events. They shared Laurie's story, not to relive it, but to warn others. They taught people to look beneath the surface, to question red flags, to understand that love isn't always what it seems. Every July, on the anniversary of Laurie's disappearance, friends gathered in Memory Grove Park, the same trail she never returned from. They lit candles, they ran in her honor, they cried, they remembered. Years passed, but Utah didn't forget. Laurie's Law, passed in 2006, became a lasting legacy. It meant that no murderer would again benefit from loopholes in minimum sentencing. It gave judges the power to ensure justice. Real justice could be delivered. Her death had changed the law. It had changed the state, and yet nothing could bring her back. Mark became eligible for parole after just 6 years, but every time his name came up, the board was flooded with letters, calls, protests. Laurie's family made sure no one forgot what he had done. He robbed us of a daughter, her father once said. He robbed us of trust in human decency. In 2016, Mark wrote a brief letter to the parole board, apologizing again, but the apology was rejected, not because it wasn't enough, but because it was too late, too calculated, too clean. He remains behind bars to this day. Laurie was 27 when she died. She had a smile that lit up rooms, a heart full of kindness, and dreams that reached far beyond Salt Lake City. She had believed in love, believed in her husband, and for that trust, she paid with her life. Her story doesn't end with courtrooms or prison walls. It lives on in the women who listened, the families who looked closer, the laws that changed. Laurie Hacking